The first time I realized my own parents were willing to destroy my life to save my sister's marriage. I was sitting at my kitchen table staring at a lawsuit with my name printed across the top. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the papers. My parents were suing me because I refused to sell the apartment I had spent 9 years paying for. And they claimed they had a moral right to the money because my sister needed it for her divorce. But what they didn't know was that I had already discovered the real reason they desperately wanted that apartment sold. And when I finally exposed the truth in court, my parents didn't just lose the lawsuit. They lost the one thing they had always assumed they could control: me. Tell me honestly, if your own parents sued you because you refused to give up your home for your sibling, would you forgive them? Or would you finally teach them that family doesn't mean unlimited access to your life? I grew up believing my family was close. Looking back, I realize we weren't close. I was simply the child who was expected to sacrifice, while my younger sister was the child everyone protected. Her name was Emily, and from the time we were kids, my parents treated her like she was made of glass. If Emily wanted something, there was always a reason she deserved it. If I wanted something, there was always a reason I could wait. When I was 16, I started working weekends at a grocery store because I wanted to save for college. My parents told me they were proud of my work ethic. Then Emily wanted a new phone, and my mother casually suggested I lend her the money I had saved. I refused, and my parents acted like I had betrayed the entire family. That pattern continued for years. When I got my first real job after college, my parents asked me to help with Emily's car payments. When she got married, they asked me to contribute to the wedding because she was starting a new chapter. When she and her husband bought furniture, I was asked to help because they were young and struggling. Every time I questioned it, my father would say the same thing: "We're family. You help family." So I did. I helped. I paid bills. I covered emergencies. I sent money when my sister claimed she was short. I even helped my parents with repairs on their house. I never kept a spreadsheet of everything I gave them because I genuinely believed it was family. But there was one thing I refused to sacrifice: my apartment. I bought it when I was 27. It wasn't luxurious. It was a small 2-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood, but every wall represented years of early mornings, overtime shifts, skipped vacations, and careful saving. I remembered signing the papers and getting the keys. I remember standing in that empty living room, holding the keys in my hand and thinking, I finally built something that belongs to me. My parents congratulated me. At least, that's what I thought. Years later, Emily's marriage began falling apart. At first, she told everyone her husband was emotionally distant. Then she said he had been financially irresponsible. Then the story changed again, and suddenly she was telling people that he was trying to leave her with nothing. My parents immediately took her side. I didn't know the details, and honestly, I didn't want to. Divorce is messy enough without siblings becoming judges. I told Emily I loved her and would support her emotionally, but I couldn't keep funding every crisis in her life. That was when everything changed. One evening, my mother called me and said, "We need to talk about your apartment." I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She explained that Emily needed money for lawyers, temporary housing, and legal expenses. Then she said my apartment was the obvious solution. I asked what she meant. She said I should sell it, give the money to Emily, and move somewhere cheaper for a while. I actually thought I had misunderstood her. "Mom, this is my home." She replied, "It's a property. Don't make this emotional." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I reminded her that I had spent years paying the mortgage, and that I still owed money on it. She said I could use whatever remained after the sale. Then my father got on the phone. His voice was cold. "Your sister is going through the hardest time of her life. You have an asset. She needs money. What exactly is the problem?" I said the problem was that they were asking me to give up my home to solve a problem I didn't create. My father became furious. He said I was selfish. My mother started crying. Then came the sentence that stayed with me. "One day you'll regret choosing a building over your sister." I told them it wasn't about choosing a building over Emily. It was about choosing not to destroy my own financial stability. They hung up on me. 2 days later, Emily called. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't even pretend. She said, "Mom and Dad told me you're refusing to help." I said I had already helped her more times than I could count. She replied, "You're my brother. You're supposed to help me." I told her I was willing to help within reason, but selling my apartment was not happening. She started crying and said I didn't understand what she was going through. Then she said something that made my stomach turn. "You don't need that apartment as much as I need the money." I ended the call. For the first time in my life, I stopped trying to convince them that I wasn't selfish. I simply said no. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, my father came to my apartment without telling me. He stood outside my door and demanded that I reconsider. I refused to let him inside. He said he had already spoken with a realtor. I asked him what he meant. He said he had looked into the market and knew exactly how much the apartment could sell for. That terrified me. "Why are you talking to realtors about my property?" I asked. He said, "Because somebody has to be responsible." I told him to leave. He said, "You're making a huge mistake." Then he walked away. The next morning, I received an email from a lawyer. My parents had filed a civil lawsuit against me. Their argument was bizarre. They claimed that because they had financially supported me during childhood and had helped me with certain expenses when I purchased the apartment, they were entitled to consideration of the property as a family asset. They weren't literally claiming they owned my apartment outright, but they were attempting to pressure the court into forcing a sale or awarding them a financial interest. I read the complaint 3 times. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because sometimes something is so outrageous that your brain doesn't know how else to react. My parents had actually sued their own son because I wouldn't sell my home to fund my sister's divorce. I hired an attorney, and that was when I started digging into everything. My lawyer asked me to gather bank statements, payment records, emails, property documents, and any evidence showing where the money for the apartment came from. I opened old folders, searched through emails, and started reconstructing years of financial history. That's when I noticed something strange. Several of the payments my parents claimed were contributions toward my apartment weren't actually contributions at all. They were loans, and I had repaid every single one. I found old messages from my father confirming the amounts and repayment dates. I found bank transfers. I found receipts. I found everything. Then I discovered something even more disturbing. A few months earlier, Emily had apparently discussed the possibility of selling my apartment with my parents before they ever approached me. In one message, my mother wrote that if I sold the apartment, there should be enough left to solve Emily's immediate problems and put some aside for Mom and Dad. I stared at that sentence for a long time. They weren't just trying to help Emily. They were planning around my money. My lawyer told me not to contact them directly, so I didn't. But then another document appeared. My parents had apparently told a family friend that I had promised to sell the apartment. That was a complete lie. I had never promised anything. Then I found a message from Emily to my mother where she said, "He'll give in eventually. He always does." That sentence hurt more than the lawsuit. Because she was right. I always had. I had spent years teaching them that if they pushed hard enough, guilt me enough, or made me feel selfish enough, I would eventually surrender. They didn't expect me to fight back. They expected the old version of me. But that version was gone. As the court date approached, the pressure became unbearable. Extended family members started calling. Some told me I should compromise. Others said I was embarrassing my parents. One aunt told me, "It's only money. Your sister needs you." I asked her if she would sell her own home. She went silent. Another relative told me that parents sacrifice everything for their children, and that children should return the favor. I said I had no problem helping my parents if they genuinely needed help. But they weren't asking me to support them. They were trying to take control of something I had earned. Nobody had an answer for that. Then 3 days before the hearing, my mother called me. I almost didn't answer. She said she wanted to settle everything privately. I asked what she was offering. She said if I agreed to sell the apartment, they would drop the lawsuit. I asked where Emily would live after the divorce. My mother said she would figure it out. That answer told me everything. They weren't even talking about a temporary emergency anymore. They simply wanted my apartment converted into cash. I asked my mother why she thought my sister's divorce should be funded with my home. She said, "Because you can afford it." Y raplia. No, Mom. I can afford my home because I worked for it. She started crying and said I had changed. I told her, "You're right. I have." So that's where I was. My parents had sued me. My sister expected me to sacrifice my home. My relatives were calling me selfish. And I had evidence that the entire story they'd told the court wasn't true. Before I tell you what happened next, pause for a second and imagine you're standing in my shoes. Your parents are demanding your home. Your sibling believes she's entitled to it. Your entire family is telling you to surrender because it's easier than fighting. Would you walk away just to keep the peace? Or would you finally stand up for yourself? Even if it meant your family hated you? Tell me what you would have done, because at that moment, I honestly didn't know whether I was protecting myself or destroying my family. The hearing began on a gray Tuesday morning. I sat beside my attorney while my parents sat across the courtroom. My father wouldn't look at me. My mother kept whispering to her lawyer. Emily wasn't there at first. Then she walked in late, wearing sunglasses and carrying an expensive handbag. She looked nervous, but not devastated. I remember thinking that was strange. My parents' lawyer presented their argument first. He talked about family support, sacrifices, and how my parents had allegedly helped me purchase the apartment. He described my refusal as unreasonable and argued that some form of financial relief was justified because my sister was experiencing hardship. Then my lawyer stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult anyone. He simply presented documents. First came the mortgage records, then my bank statements, then the repayment records. Every alleged family contribution was matched with a repayment. My parents' story began collapsing piece by piece. Then came the messages. My mother had written that selling my apartment could provide enough money to help Emily and leave some money for my parents. My father had discussed contacting a realtor without my permission. Emily had written that I would give in eventually. The courtroom became very quiet. My father finally looked at me. His face was pale. The judge asked whether my parents disputed the authenticity of the messages. Their attorney couldn't. Then my lawyer introduced another document that changed everything. It was a financial statement from Emily's divorce proceedings. According to the documents, Emily had already received a substantial settlement from her husband. She wasn't facing homelessness. She wasn't penniless. She had money available to her. She had simply been spending it quickly and wanted additional funds. My parents had known this. They knew she wasn't in the desperate situation they had described. Yet they still sued me. The judge asked my mother directly why she believed my apartment should be sold when Emily had access to her own settlement funds. My mother began crying. She said, "She's my daughter." The judge replied, "And he is your son." I will never forget the silence after that. Then my father finally spoke. He said he believed I had more financial stability than Emily. My lawyer asked him one question. "So your position is that because your son managed his money responsibly, he should lose his home to subsidize his sister's choices?" My father didn't answer. That was the moment I knew they had lost. The judge dismissed their claim regarding my apartment. But there was more. Because the court had evidence suggesting their allegations about my financial contributions and ownership rights were knowingly misleading, my attorney requested legal costs. The judge ultimately ordered my parents to cover a significant portion of my legal expenses. They walked out of the courtroom without looking at me. Emily stayed behind. She approached me in the hallway and said, "You really did this to us?" I looked at her and said, "No. You did this when you decided my home was yours to take." She called me heartless. I told her I had spent years being generous because I loved her. But generosity stops being generosity when someone believes they're entitled to it. Then I walked away. The aftermath was brutal. My parents stopped speaking to me. Some relatives continued to blame me. Others quietly apologized after learning the truth. One cousin admitted that my parents had told the family I was refusing to help because I was greedy. She said nobody knew about Emily's settlement money or the messages. For the first time, I understood how easily a family can create a villain when the villain refuses to obey. Emily eventually moved into a smaller place and started rebuilding her finances. She never apologized. Maybe she never will. My parents eventually contacted me months later. My mother left a voicemail, saying she missed me. My father sent a short message asking whether we could move past everything. I stared at that message for several minutes. Part of me wanted to respond immediately. Another part remembered sitting alone at my kitchen table with that lawsuit in front of me, realizing the people who raised me were willing to gamble my future for someone else's problems. I finally replied with one sentence. I can forgive what happened, but I will never allow it to happen again. My mother called me after that. We talked for nearly an hour. She admitted that they had convinced themselves I would recover financially faster than Emily. She admitted that they had become so focused on protecting my sister that they stopped seeing me as someone who could be hurt. My father didn't apologize directly, but he eventually admitted that suing me had been a mistake. I didn't immediately invite them back into my life. Trust doesn't return because someone says they're sorry. It returns because their behavior changes over time. And slowly things did change. My parents stopped asking me for money. They stopped comparing me to Emily. They stopped treating my success as a family emergency fund. I still have my apartment. Every time I unlock that door, I remember everything that happened. But I don't look at it the same way anymore. It isn't just a home. It's proof that I finally learned something I should have learned years earlier. Loving your family doesn't require destroying yourself for them. I used to think saying no made me selfish. Now I understand that sometimes saying no is the only way to protect the relationship from becoming completely toxic. If I had sold my apartment, they probably would have asked for something else later. Another bill. Another emergency. Another sacrifice. And I would have kept giving until there was nothing left. The lawsuit forced me to see the truth. My parents didn't suddenly become cruel. They had simply become accustomed to my silence. The moment I stopped being silent, they had to confront the consequences of their expectations. I don't know whether my family will ever be the same. Maybe it shouldn't be. Some relationships need to change before they can become healthy. I still love my parents. I still care about my sister. But love without boundaries can turn into resentment, and sacrifice without limits can turn into entitlement. I learned that the hard way in a courtroom, with my own family sitting across from me. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this. Helping your family should be a choice, not a sentence. Nobody gets to claim your future simply because you share their last name. So if you were on my side, like this video if you were on my side, subscribe for more stories like this, and share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Would you have refused from the beginning? Or would you have tried to keep the peace? And if your family had actually sued you over your own home, would you ever trust them again? I'll see you all in the next story.